I'm going to reread chapter 17 and 18, The Bowl, because the video that I first uploaded wasn't good and the sound was way off and it sounded terrible, so we're going to reread. I think I talked about the Jane Austen Center in Bath, and there is a Jane Austen festival in September. Go check that out. That sounds incredible. Bath in England. And there's also a Not Sorry, the Harry Potter and the Sacred Text production companies, the Not Sorry production. And so if you go to Not Sorry Productions, they have a Jane Austen pilgrimage. They call them pilgrimages. And theirs is about the book Persuasion, which I will get to. I'm going to read all of them. I'm just going to read all the books. And they have a pilgrimage to Bath also. So Bath is definitely a place Jane Austenites, Janeites will know. And I did just watch a YouTube video by Ellie Dashwood, who I think her page is Britlit, like British Literature 101. And she had this really cool quote that she has a video that's like things to know before reading Pride and Prejudice. And she did say like the past is like another language. Like all the language in this book, it's from 200 plus years ago. The language is different. The customs were different. And Jane was so good at finding the irony in those. Even the proposal in the next few chapters that I already have videos on, refusing a proposal the first 3 times was proper. Like it was considered improper to just accept a proposal. You know, which could in fact, studying history can show us where we have problems today. Studying history is interesting. So I'm going to reread chapter 17 and 18. Hopefully this video that I'm making currently will be better than the last one, because the timing was all off, and that's so crazy. I married into a family where that is not allowed. The sound and your mouth have to be the same. And it's crazy. When it's off, it does look crazy. When I went back and watched that video, I was like, this looks nuts. Okay, so continuing on chapter 17, and we'll get a little into 18, and hopefully I can edit it and it'll sound better. Elizabeth related to Jane the next day what had passed between Mr. Wickham and herself. Jane listened with astonishment and concern. She knew not how to believe that Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard. And yet it was not in her nature to question the veracity of a young man with such amiable appearance as Wickham. The possibility of his having endured such unkindness was enough to interest all her tender feelings, and nothing remained therefore to be done but to think well of them both, to defend the conduct of each, and throw into the account of accident or mistake whatever could not be otherwise explained. And I do remember reading this and thinking of my husband Brian, and Brian is what we call, he does the most generous interpretation of everyone. So Jane and Brian are like little kindred spirits. Maybe Jane Bennett is reincarnated into my husband Brian. And it's beautiful outside, and it's raining, and it's lovely. You can't really see the rain. You can just see my dying plants in the windowsill. They have both, she said, been deceived, I dare say, in some way or other, of which we can form no idea. Interested people have perhaps misrepresented each to the other. It is, in short, impossible for us to conjecture the causes or circumstances which may have alienated them without actual blame on either side. No one is to blame, and no one did anything wrong. Very true indeed. And now, my dear Jane, what have you got to say on behalf of the interested people who have probably been concerned in the business? Do clear them too, or shall we be obliged to think ill of somebody? That's so funny. Laugh as much as you choose, but you will not laugh at me out of my opinion. You will not laugh me out of my opinion. My dearest Lizzie, but do but concern in what a graceful light it places Mr. Darcy to be treating his father's favourite in such a manner. one whom his father has promised to provide for. It is impossible. No man of common humanity, no man who had any value for his character, could be capable of it. Can his most intimate friends be so excessively deceived on him? Oh, no. How can much more easily believe Mr. Bingley's being imposed on than that Mr. Wickham should invent such a history for himself as he gave me last night? Names, facts, everything mentioned without ceremony. If it not be so, let Mr. Darcy contradict it. Besides, there was truth in his looks. First impressions. What do we do with him? It is difficult indeed. It is distressing. One does not know what to think. I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think. Elizabeth. Too hasty, maybe a little too hasty on both parts. But Jane could think with certainty on only one point, that Mr. Bingley, if he had been imposed on, would have much to suffer when the affair became public. The two young ladies were summoned from the shrubbery where this conversation passed by the arrival of the very persons of whom they had been speaking. Oh, Mr. Bingley and his sisters came to give their personal invitation for the long-expected ball at Netherfield. Y'all, this ball. Boy, this ball. Which was fixed for the following Tuesday. The two ladies were delighted to see their dear friend again, called it an age since they had met. Exaggerating, these two ladies, and repeatedly asked what she had been doing with herself since their separation. To the rest of the family they paid little attention, avoiding Mrs. Bennet as much as possible, saying not much to Elizabeth and nothing at all to the others. They were soon gone again, rising from their seats with an activity which took their brother by surprise, and hurrying off as eager to escape Mrs. Bennet's civilities. Mrs. Bennet is not a joy to talk to for these young ladies. Mr. Bingley's sisters. Ugh. The prospect of the Netherfield ball was extremely agreeable to every female of the family. Mrs. Bennet chose to consider it as given in compliment to the eldest daughter, and was particularly flattered by receiving the invitation from Mr. Bingley himself, instead of a ceremonious card. Jane pictured herself a happy evening in the society of the two friends, manifesting, and the attentions of their brother. Oh, she's like picturing a happy little dancing evening. And Elizabeth thought that with the pleasure of dancing a great deal with Mr. Wickham, and of seeing a confirmation of everything in Mr. Darcy's looks and behavior. She said, confirmation, I would like confirmation about this terrible man. The happiness anticipated by Catherine and Lydia depended less on any single event or any particular person, although they each, like Elizabeth, meant to dance half the evening with Mr. Wickham. He was by no means the only partner who could satisfy them. A ball was, at any rate, a ball. They want to dance with everyone. And even Mary, little Mary, could assure her family that she had no disinclination for it. While I can have my mornings to myself, said she, it is enough. I think it no sacrifice to join occasionally in evening engagements. Society has claims on us all, and I profess myself one of those who consider intervals of recreation and amusement as desirable for everybody. A little diversion of the mind, Mary. She's like an 80-year-old teenager. That's so funny. Elizabeth's spirits were so high on this occasion that though she did not often speak unnecessarily to Mr. Collins, she could not help asking him whether he intended to accept Mr. Bingley's invitation, and if he did, whether he would think it proper to join in the evening's amusement. And she was rather surprised to find that he entertained no scruple whatsoever on that head, and was very far from dreading a rebuke, either from the Archbishop or Lady Catherine de Bourgh, by venturing to dance. She said, you guys probably don't dance. You should probably set this one out, huh? You're a little embarrassing. You're going to set this ball out, right? Oh, my God. I am by no means of the opinion, I assure you, said he, that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character to respectable people, can have any evil tendency. and I am so far from objecting to dancing myself, that I shall hope to be honoured with the hands of all my fair cousins in the course of the evening, and I take this opportunity of soliciting yours, Miss Elizabeth, for the first 2 dances especially. A preference which I trust my cousin Jane will attribute to the right cause, and not to any disrespect for her. Elizabeth felt herself completely taken in. She had fully proposed being engaged by Mr. Wickham for those very dances, and to have Mr. Collins instead. Ugh. Her liveliness had never been worse timed. There was no help for it, however. Mr. Wickham's happiness and her own were perforce delayed a little longer, and Mr. Collins' proposal accepted with as good as grace as she could. She was not the better pleased with his gallantry from the idea it suggested of something more. It now first struck her that she was selected from among her sisters as worthy of being mistress of Hunsford Parsonage, and of assisting to form a quadrille table at Rosings in the absence of more eligible visitors. The idea soon reached her conviction as she observed his increasing civilities toward herself, and heard his frequent attempt at a compliment on her wit and vivacity. She's got wit, she's got vivacity. That's all Mr. Collins needs. Okay, and though more astonished than gratified herself by this effect of her charms, it was not long before her mother gave her to understand that the probability of their marriage was extremely agreeable to her. Her mom said, I'd like it if you got married and didn't inconvenience me any longer. I don't really care what you think. Mr. Collins... No, to her. Elizabeth, however, did not choose to take the hint. Whatever could you mean? Being well aware that a serious dispute must be the consequence of any reply. Mr. Collins might never make the offer. Until then, it was useless to quarrel about him. If there had not been a Netherfield ball to prepare for and talk of, the younger Miss Bennets would have been in a very pitiable state at this time, for from the day of the invitation to the day of the ball, there was such a succession of rain as prevented their walking to Meryton once. No aunt, no officers, no news could be sought after. The very shoe roses for Netherfield were got by proxy. Shoe roses, I found out the first time I read this, the second time I read this, was they are like decorations on shoes. Shoe roses. They couldn't even go buy them themselves. They were got by proxy. Even Elizabeth might have found some trial of her patience in the weather, which totally suspended the improvement of her acquaintance with Mr. Wickham, and nothing less than a dance on Tuesday could have made such a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday endurable to Kitty. Okay, on to the ball. I'll read a few pages of this. This is a long chapter, so I'll read a few pages of this. I'll cut the cameras. My producer, my editor will all figure it out. Just me. It's just me. And then hopefully we'll get a good cut, because this is a long chapter. Chapter 18, the bull. Comings and goings and peoples and doings. Chapter 18. Till Elizabeth entered the drawing room at Netherfield and looked in vain for Mr. Wickham among the cluster of red coats there assembled, a doubt of his being present had never occurred to her. The certainty of meeting him had not been checked by any of those recollections that might not unreasonably have alarmed her. She had dressed with more than usual care. She was trying to impress him, and prepared in the highest spirits for the conquest of all that remained unsubdued of his heart. That's a really pretty saying. Prepared, I'm going to underline it in pink, because that's what pen I have. Prepared in the highest spirits for the conquest of all that remained unsubdued of his heart. Whoa. Trusting that it was not more than might be won in the course of the evening. In an instant arose the dreadful suspicion of his being purposely omitted for Mr. Darcy's pleasure in the Bingleys' invitation to the officers. Mr. Darcy, that trifling man. And though this was not exactly the case, the absolute fact of his absence was pronounced by his friend Denny, to whom Lydia eagerly applied, and who told them that Wickham had been obliged to go to town on business the day before, and was not yet returned. Adding, with a significant smile, "I do not imagine his business would have called him away just now, if he had not wanted to avoid a certain gentleman here." Mr. Darcy. This part of his intelligence, though unheard by Lydia, was caught by Elizabeth. And as it assured her that Darcy was not less answerable for Wickham's absence than if her first surmise had been just, every feeling of displeasure against the former who was so sharpened by immediate disappointment that she could hardly reply with tolerable civility to the polite inquiries which he directly afterwards approached to make. Attendance, forbearance, patience with Darcy was injury to Wickham. She was resolved against any sort of conversation with him, and turned away with a degree of ill humour which she could not wholly surmount, even in speaking to Mr. Bingley, whose blind partiality provoked her. She said, You don't even see how terrible this guy is? I don't even want to talk to you." Oof. Friends of your enemy are friends of your friends are friends, but friends of your enemies are even better friends. Yikes. But Elizabeth was not formed ill humour, and though every prospect of her own was destroyed for the evening, it could not dwell long on her spirits, and having told all her griefs to Charlotte Lucas, whom she had not seen for a week because of the rain, she was soon able to make a voluntary transition to the oddities of her cousin. Oh, her cousin. And to point him out to her particular notice. The first two dances, however, brought a return of distress. They were dances of mortification. Mr. Collins, awkward and solemn, apologizing instead of attending, and often moving wrong without being aware of it, in front of God and everyone, gave her all the shame and misery which a disagreeable partner for a couple of dances can give. The moment of her release from him was ecstasy. This is really good description. The moment of her release from him was ecstasy. She danced next with an officer, and had the refreshment of talking of Wickham, and of hearing that he was universally liked. When those dances were over, she returned to Charlotte Lucas, and was in conversation with her, when she found herself suddenly addressed by Mr. Darcy, who took her so much by surprise in his application for her hand, that without knowing what she did, she accepted him. He walked away again immediately, and she was left to fret over her own want of presence of mind. Charlotte tried to console her. "I dare say you will find him very agreeable." "Heaven forbid! That would be the greatest misfortune of all, to find a man agreeable whom one is determined to hate. Do not wish me such an evil." She is determined to hate this man, and he will. We'll see what happens. When the dancing recommenced, however, and Darcy approached to claim her hand, Charlotte could not help cautioning her in a whisper not to be a simpleton, and allow her fancy for Wickham to make her appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man 10 times his consequence. Elizabeth made no answer, and took her place in the set, amazed at the dignity to which she was arrived in being allowed to stand opposite Mr. Darcy, and reading in her neighbours' looks their equal amazement in beholding him. They stood for some time, without speaking a word. Wow, and she began to imagine that their silence was to last through the 2 dances, and at first was resolved to not break it. She said, You're not going to talk? I won't talk. And he said, nobody wants to talk. Till suddenly fancying that it would be a greater punishment to her partner to oblige him to talk, she made some slight observation on the dance. He replied and was again silent. Okay. Testing the waters, silence is the theme of this dance. After a pause of some minutes, she addressed him the second time with, "It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some sort of remark on the size of the room or the number of couples." He smiled and assured her that whatever she wished him to say should be said. She said, he said, "Tell me what to say and I will say it." "Very well, that reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones. But now we may be silent." "Do you talk by rule then while you are dancing?" "Sometimes one must speak a little, you know. It would look odd to be entirely silent for a half-hour together, and yet for the disadvantage of some, conversation ought to be so arranged as that they may have the trouble of saying as little as possible. Are you consulting your own feelings in the present case, or do you imagine that you are gratifying mine?" "Both," replied Elizabeth archly, "for I have always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak, unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity with all the clat of a proverb." "This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I'm sure," said he. "How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it a faithful portrait, undoubtedly. I must not decide on my own performance." He made no answer, and they were again silent till they had gone down the dance. When he asked her if she and her sisters did not very often walk to Meryton, she answered in the affirmative, and unable to resist the temptation, added, "When you met us there the other day, we had just been forming a new acquaintance." Do you know anything about it? The effect was immediate. The deeper shade of horror overspread his features, but he said not a word. And Elizabeth, though blaming herself for her own weakness, could not go on. At length Darcy spoke, and in constrained manner said, "Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure his making friends. Whether he may be equally capable of retaining them is less certain." "He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship," replied Elizabeth with emphasis, "and in a manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life." During a dance. They're having this tete-a-tete during a dance. Oh my gosh. Woo. Yeah, Darcy made no answer, right, and seemed desirous of changing the subject. Yeah. At that moment, Sir William Lucas appeared close to them, meaning to pass through the set, to the other side of the room, but on perceiving Mr. Darcy, he stopped with a bow of superior courtesy to compliment him on his dancing and his partner. "I have been most highly gratified indeed, my dear sir. Such very superior dancing is not often seen. It is evident that you belong to the first circles. Allow me to say, however, that your fair partner does not disgrace you, and that I must hope that you have this pleasure often repeated, especially when a certain desirable event, my dear Eliza," glancing at her sister envyingly, "shall take place. They're going to get married, and you guys can dance at their wedding. Ooh. What congratulations will then flow in! I appeal to Mr. Darcy. Let me not interrupt you. But. I got into Shakespeare. Let me not. Okay. But let me not interrupt you, sir. You will not thank me for detaining you from the bewitching converse of the young lady, whose bright eyes are also upbraiding me." The latter part of this address was scarcely heard by Darcy, but Sir William's allusion to his friend seemed to strike him forcibly, and his eyes were directed with a very serious expression towards Bingley and Jane, who were dancing together. Recovering himself, however, shortly, he returned to his partner, and said, Sir William Lucas's impression has made me forget what we were talking of. I do not think we were speaking at all. Sir William could not have interrupted two people in the room who had less to say for themselves. We have tried 2 or 3 subjects already without success, and what we are talking of next I cannot imagine. What think you of books? Said he, smiling. That's funny. He said, I know you like books. You want to talk about books? Books? No, I am sure we never read the same, or not with the same feelings. I am sorry you think so, but if that be the case, there can at least be no want of subject. We may compare our different opinions. No, I cannot talk of books in a ballroom. My head is always full of something else. The present always occupies you in such scenes, does it? Said he with a look of doubt. Oof. Yes, always, she replied, without knowing what she said, for her thoughts had wandered far from the subject, and soon afterwards appeared by her suddenly exclaiming, I remember hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave, that your resentments, once created, was unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to its being created. She wants to circle. Let's circle back. Let's circle back to Mr. Wickham. I am, he said with a firm voice, and never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice. I hope not. It is particularly incumbent on those who never change their opinion to be secure of judging properly at first. May I ask to what these questions tend? Merely the illustration of your character, she said. Said she. Endeavouring to shake off her gravity, I am trying to make it out. Ooh, this scene in the movie is so good when it's like, if you guys haven't seen Pride and Prejudice, Keira Knightley from 2005, it's so tense when they're dancing, and then there's like parts of this conversation happening, and then this beautiful violin, beautiful music starts, and then it cuts to them talking and dancing, and there's nobody else in the room. It's just them, and it's so tense and beautiful. I get chills every time I think about it. I even think I said this last time when I was reading, because, ooh, it's so good. And the music is truly gorgeous. And just cutting to a scene of them dancing all by themselves in a room, I always think about what filming is like. Sorry. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, the book. And what is your success? She shook her head. I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as puzzle me exceedingly. I can readily believe, he answered gravely, that reports may vary greatly with respect to me, and I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you were not to sketch my character at the present moment, as there is reason to fear that the performance would reflect no credit on either. But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity. I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours, he coldly replied. She said no more, and they went down the other dance, and parted in silence. I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours. I guess that means that he'd be happy to talk about his likeness at any time. But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity. I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours. Oh, and he doesn't want to, suspend her Okay. That's interesting. If I were smarter, I could probably analyze that part, but it confuses me, so I just needed to pause for a second. I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours, he said coldly. She said no more, and they went down the other dance and parted in silence, and on each side dissatisfied, though not to an equal degree, for in Darcy's breast there was a tolerable, powerful feeling towards her. which soon procured her pardon and directed all his anger against another. Yeah, I wonder if he's just like, I really want her to get to know me, and I know that she doesn't really know me. Golly, it would be so. I feel like all the politeness and all the like formalities get in the way of just like saying what you feel. Wow. Wow, wow, wow.